Welcome to the December 21st, 2020 Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission meeting for the City of Raleigh. This will be our last meeting of the year, and we have a full attendance today, so thank you very much, everybody, for coming. First, I would like to go around and do introductions real quick. We can start with I will just call out by name as I see it down my list, since we don't know who's who, and I'll start with myself. My name is Dwight Otwell. I am the chair of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission, and I am a de facto member of all the committees. Next up, we have Eric Lamb.
I am Eric Lamb. I am with the city's transportation department.
And Barbara Godwin.
Barbara Godwin, micromobility coordinator for Department of Transportation.
And next up is Vice Chair Elizabeth Alley.
Elizabeth Alley. I'm the vice chair and also on the policy committee.
And next up, I see Kari Barsness.
Hi, this is Kari Barsness, and I also serve on the policy committee.
And Kelly Woodall. Next down the list is Liz Hester.
Liz Hester, I'm on the planning committee.
And B. Pearson. Pearson, did I say it right? Please tell me how to say it.
I'm B, and I work with the City of Raleigh as the Bicycle and Pedestrian Outreach Coordinator.
Mary Sell.
Mary Sell, I'm on the planning committee.
And Nick Neptune.
Nick Neptune on the Outreach Committee.
Next up is Paul Black.
Paul Black, I'm city staff. I'm the bike and pedestrian program manager.
And Pierre Tong.
Pierre Tong, planning committee.
Robert Parrish.
Did you hear me?
Yeah. Could you repeat yourself, please? We didn't.
I'm on the policy committee.
Thank you. And Susan Hatchell.
Hello, happy solstice. I am on the community outreach committee.
All right, thank you, everybody. I believe next up on the agenda, we have the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the previous meeting, or do we need to take a moment to read?
I'll just bring, there was one, seemed like a word was missing. Probably one of those typo things that happens. It's on the second page, second paragraph, third sentence. It said he would for that to be continued, to be surveyed. I think it should be he would like for that to be. Pretty simple. Everything else looks fine to me. I'll make a motion to approve if with that one change, if everybody else is ready.
I'll go ahead and second. And let's have all in favor, raise hand. Do we do it all by raised hands now, Eric?
Although I have got both, let's see. Yeah, and Robert, I did not have you on video. Can you please indicate by saying aye?
Aye.
There you go.
All right, thank you very much. Next up is public comments. Do we have any members of the public that are present here to speak today?
No, sir, not this evening.
All right, well, we can move right on to the presentations. And I believe we have Chris Nickfar from the Parks Department here to talk about the Greenway Master Plan update.
Chris, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
All right, you're good.
Hi, everybody.
I'm getting the presentation up right now.
Okay.
Shoot. All right, go right ahead, Chris.
Okay, so I apologize. This is the first time that I'm doing one of these presentations using WebEx. I'm very, very familiar with Zoom and Microsoft Teams. So Eric, when I need to go to the next slide, do I tell you or can I move that myself?
Just let me know.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Dwight, for the introduction. Once again, I'm Chris Nickfar with the city's Parks Department, and I'm the project manager for the Greenway Master Plan update. So I'll be giving you a presentation on that this evening. And I'll go ahead and apologize in advance. There is a lot of information for me to share. So, and I know that several of you have already are very familiar with the plan so far. So some of it will be repetitive for you, but for others, I hope you find it interesting. Eric, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. This is a little bit of history on the Greenway system in Raleigh. The Greenway system wasn't proposed until City Council until 1969, and then the first Greenway Master Plan wasn't adopted until 1976. It was subsequently updated in 1986 and then again in 1989. And that 1989 plan is the most recent update that we have to the plan. You'll notice in the text there that each time the Greenway Master Plan was updated, the system grew. So the first plan consisted of 77 miles of Greenway Trail. And the most recent version, 1989, has that up to 270 miles. And that's trails and Greenway corridor. Okay, Eric, next. So this slide provides an overview of the approach that we're taking with updating the master plan. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of topics and areas that need to be addressed, considering how long it's been since the last plan was adopted and how much the city has changed in that time. We started by doing a review of the existing plans that inform the system that have determined how it got to where it is today. We looked at existing conditions. We've conducted a tremendous amount of public outreach. We'll be continuing to do that throughout the course of the project. We're developing a project prioritization matrix. We are going to be working on project recommendations and strategies for implementation, looking at funding opportunities and cost estimates for the highest prioritized projects, and then going to be producing a final master plan report probably in the summer of this next year. Okay, Eric. So the plan update is guided by a 23-member steering committee, and they represent an incredibly diverse group of like backgrounds, different interests, and organizations. And that group is supported by an 18-member design review team that consists of city staff from all the different departments that have an interest in the Greenway system. And they are here to serve as a resource to the steering committee for any professional expertise that they might need. Okay. So looking back, we start with our existing plan review, and this gives us an idea of what the history of the system is, how the Parks Department is supposed to make decisions on projects, and what we're seeing in different places across the city. Next slide. And what we've learned by doing that, and was not news to us also, is that the Greenway system was originally developed as a floodplain management tool and also as a way to preserve environmentally sensitive stream corridors and the habitats that those serve. The UDO is the key implementing tool that we have that gives us direction on how the Greenway system is to be expanded. Next slide. And something else that jumped out to us when we're reviewing all of the area plans and all the different citywide plans is that the greenways are a key element of most of the plans, and that there is an emphasis on, while historically the greenways have been used for recreational purposes, moving forward in the future, using those more as a way for people to get around with connections to public transit and orienting some of the trails towards commuter use. Okay. So looking at the existing conditions, we have a two-prong approach to doing that. The first is to actually look at the physical conditions on the trails today, look at the existing policies that we have set in place to guide the maintenance of the system and construction moving forward. And then the second prong of that approach is looking at public outreach and learning what the public's interests are in terms of new projects, what their priorities are, and what they find most important and what they would like to see. Okay. So starting to look at the existing conditions, we have trail counters spread evenly distributed throughout the system. And what you're looking at here is 365 days worth of count data for those trail counters. And the counters are really great. They separate or differentiate between cyclists and pedestrians. And that type of information helps us determine what kind of amenities maybe would be more highly desired on one trail versus another, because there certainly are different amenities that some are more preferable to cyclists versus pedestrians. And if we look at the data here, we can see some key figures that really, or key points that really pop out. First is that the pedestrians definitely prefer the loop trails and the cyclists prefer the linear trails, and that the loop trails have the highest volume of users. And I guess in looking in hindsight, that probably shouldn't have been too much of a surprise to me. But if somebody were to have asked me prior to this which trailers are most popular, I easily would have said the Neuse River Trail, because that's the trail that we get the most calls for information about. However, if we actually look at the data, we can see that the Walnut Creek Trail around Lake Johnson Park is by far the highest used trail in our system. Okay, Eric. So looking at existing conditions, we wanted to look at what kind of gaps and barriers there are for people to get to the system and to use it. So what is a sidewalk network connecting to the system? What's a bikeway network? What kind of transit access is available? The multi-lane at-grade crossings are a challenge, so we wanted to see where those actually are and how difficult they are. Wayfinding signs, and then looking at slopes and grades. Go ahead, Eric. So this is one of the maps that we've produced and that we'll be sharing with the public up within the next, I guess, the early part of 2021. Just in terms of trying to keep this presentation concise, I've pulled out just a couple of pieces from our existing conditions report. And what you're looking at here is one of the maps that shows the existing sidewalk network as it relates to the Greenway system. This slide, obviously, where the map was not oriented or developed in thought of putting it into a PowerPoint presentation, but when you do look at it in the final document, you can zoom in and zoom out, and it's very clear and easy to see. But what you're seeing here is the street network adjacent to the Neuse River Trail in that zoomed in or larger graphic that's there. And all of the streets that are shown in that yellow gold color, those are all streets that have a sidewalk on them. All the purple connections, they do not have sidewalks on them. So as you can see, I don't know if you can, well, I'm not sharing my screen, so you probably can't see my cursor, can you? Okay, that's fine. That's a central section of the Neuse River Trail, which is that green line that runs north to south there, sort of towards the right side of the graphic, but just to the left of the I-540. Yeah, where the cursor is now. That's the Neuse River Trail, and you can see that's a pretty big distance there on the between the northern part of that and the southern part of it, where there are no sidewalk connections to it, and for a fair distance on each side of the trail as well. Okay, Eric. Now this is looking at the bike network, and what we're showing here in the blue lines are the existing bike lanes, and in the purple are the existing buffered bike lanes. And while the city does have bike infrastructure that is beyond these two facility types, we really wanted to focus on the types of bike facilities that all users would feel comfortable using. So from like ages 7 to 70. Well, so, you know, if we are looking at something like a Sharrow, which we definitely do have, that's probably not something that everybody would be comfortable riding on. That's probably something that more active or more serious cyclists would use. So we did the same thing, applying the bikeway network over the street network, just like we did with the sidewalks. So you can see that we do definitely have a good concentration of bike facilities in the downtown area, but once you get out of that, they're very few and far between. And if we look at some of our most highly utilized trails, there's definitely a lot of work to be done to improve bike connectivity in those areas. Okay, Eric. So looking at amenities, this is something that we get frequent requests for. We actually looked at all of the 8 amenities that are called out in the Greenway Planning and Design Guide, but again, for the purpose of keeping this presentation concise, I've just included a couple of snapshots of the things that we've looked at. You can go ahead and move to the next slide, Eric. So comfort stations, which are also known as the restrooms, and they usually have water fountains with them, that is the amenity that we get the most requests for. So I thought that would be an important one to show you all tonight. So if you look at this map, everywhere you see one of those little green triangles, that's a comfort station. If you see a little blue dot, that is a water fountain. Most of the water fountains are located at a comfort station. And if you look at the graphic, you can see that the comfort stations are actually fairly distributed throughout the system. However, there are 2 things that really stand out to me. Number one is that we still have some pretty significant gaps between where they might be located. If you look at the Walnut Creek Trail, for example, between Worthdale Park on the east and Lake Johnson Park on the west, there are no comfort stations in that area, and that's several miles long. What I think also jumps out is that the comfort stations that we do have are primarily located in a park that is off of the Greenway. And what we get requests for quite often is for a comfort station that is actually on the Greenway. Some people may not want to get off of the trail and go some distance to find a restroom. They'd like to have that amenity right there next to them while they're already there. Okay, next slide. So this slide is showing the location of benches, which is another amenity that we get a fair number of requests for. And I really like this graphic because it's one of the amenities that I feel like we actually have a pretty good distribution of. There are still a couple of gaps. The central part of the Neuse River Trail there has a pretty significant gap there. The Walnut Creek Trail in the southwest section of the city has a pretty good gap there. But I think information like this is really helpful just because it'll let us know, it helps us determine where we can fill in those areas, and also that we're doing a pretty good job for the most part right now. Okay, Eric. So part of this update is to include a very high level ADA analysis to look at existing conditions and things moving forward that we can do to make our trails easier and safer to use for persons with disabilities. And obviously that we could probably do a study or a plan that is just focused on that because it is such an important and big area to be addressed. But just looking at a couple of things that we can include in this, at a high level analysis, we looked at slope analysis and also the location of adjacent curb ramps. 2 things that are very important to people that are using mobility devices, or that if they just have challenges where they can't walk very far or deal with steep grades. So Eric, can you go to the next slide? So this slide shows the slope analysis. If you were to be able to zoom in on this, which you will when you get the final document, you'll be able to see that the entire trail system is color-coded with this purple, gold, and green color categories. The green is anything that is below a 5% grade, and 5% is typically the grade that we try to stay under when we're planning for new facilities. The zoomed in graphic there on the top right, that is of Lake Johnson Park. The gold is anything that's between 5.1% grade and 8% grade, and the purple is anything that's over 8% grade. So looking at that, you can see that that might be quite a challenging trail for somebody who has difficulty with steep grades. Okay, next one. So in summary, and just referencing the graphics that I've already shown you, so that it's not, just to point out that it's not everything that we have looked at, the existing sidewalk and bikeway network does limit bike and pedestrian connectivity to the system. There are some gaps in amenities across the system, and that slopes they vary greatly throughout. I had no idea how hilly Raleigh is until we moved here, but it is very hilly. Okay, next slide. So moving into the existing conditions and looking at policies, the things that we want to look at are how are greenways defined? Do we have policy that allows for a developer to build a trail? What are our easement dedication requirements? How are greenways funded? And then ultimately comparing our policies with peer communities, cities that are similar size, both in the state of North Carolina and beyond. Okay, next slide. So a summary of our existing policy shows that most of the policy that is oriented towards the greenway system is in citywide planning documents like the UDO, the Raleigh Street Design Manual, the 2030 Comprehensive Plan, and the Strategic Plan. The only document that we have to guide us is the Greenway Planning and Design Guide, and that only provides guidance. It's not actually a policy document. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is a summary of moving forward, probably the areas that we would like to be able to develop policy that's specific to the department, Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources, that is. So looking at the design of at-grade street crossings, the requirements for connections to adjacent bike facilities and sidewalks, whether there should be lighting, if there should be lighting, where it should be, something that allows developers to build trails, which we don't currently have, and then something that is specific to funding of a trail system. Okay. So now we're moving into the public outreach portion of the Greenway Master Plan update. Going into this, we obviously knew we were going to be doing an online survey. We'd planned to do public open houses, stakeholder meetings, tabling at major events, and then direct outreach to special interest groups. But right when we got started with this process, arrived, and we had to shift our outreach efforts and focus primarily on online and direct outreach. Next slide. So without being able to do any in-person interaction, we actually were able to do one event before COVID started, and that was the Half Raleigh Marathon back in February. But without being able to do additional in-person events after that, we're focusing on the stakeholder meetings, public open houses that are virtual, and our steering committees and our online survey. Next slide. So going into the project, we always knew we were going to do an online survey, but initially we had planned to have it up from probably March until June, and to allow additional time for citizens to participate, we extended that, and the survey was actually open from March until August. We did additional project advertising, specifically additional advertising to traditionally underrepresented groups, and also additional direct outreach to those groups. Okay. So when the online survey closed, we had over 4,000 people who had completed the survey, and I think that that is fantastic. Almost 3,000 comments, almost 8,000 people that actually clicked to open the survey. Next slide. And the major themes that we heard are that trail maintenance is critical, and oftentimes people indicated, or participants indicated, that maintenance of the existing trail network is more important than expanding the system. Safe bike and pedestrian access and street crossings are a big concern for trail users. There's a strong desire for connectivity to downtown Raleigh and also to regional destinations that are outside city limits. There's a strong interest in using the Greenway system for transportation, and there is a strong interest in developing Greenway corridors that are not in stream corridors. Okay, next slide. So as far as the other public outreach that we've done, aside from the online survey, as I mentioned, we were able to do that one pop-up event at the Raleigh Half Marathon. Other than that, we have reached out to a list of 40 different organizations that are sort of focused on persons of color and other minority groups. And this is just a small list here, but if anyone wants the entire list, I can provide that. Go ahead, next slide. We also did focus groups. We had a city staff focus collection of focus group meetings. We had one for run and bike clubs, for mobility advocates, for staff of neighboring jurisdictions, so like the town of Cary, Wake Forest, Durham, Garner, anywhere that we could potentially have a connection to. We had a developer-oriented one. We had one that was specific to state parks staff, and one for BPAC. Okay. And the major themes that we heard here were very similar to what we heard through the online survey. Connectivity is a big priority. Prioritizing, again, the maintenance of the existing system versus expansion. Funding is a key obstacle. User conflicts are concerns to users. Events along the Greenway are something that some users would like to see more of. And what I think is very interesting in this last bullet is that there was a pretty striking difference between communities that saw the Greenway system as an amenity versus those that see it as a necessity. And that correlated a lot with some of the demographics related to income, race, and level of education. Okay, next slide. So the next steps, coming up in the winter of this next year, 2021, we have 4 sort of background documents that we will be releasing to the public for comment. I say that they're background, they're basically a summary of all of the work that we've done up until this point. So there's all the detailed existing system review, the existing conditions analysis that includes policy, a public outreach summary, and a project prioritization matrix that's in draft form at this point. After that, we will be developing draft recommendations, releasing that for public input, giving updates to Parks Board and City Council. And you can go ahead and move to the next slide. Yeah. And then we'll have a draft plan update in the spring, release that for public input and share that with City Council, Parks Board. And we're hoping to be able to finalize and have this plan adopted sometime in the summer of 2021 and bring it back to Parks Board, to you all, and to Council. So that is my presentation for this evening. I can open it up to questions.
I have a question. What was your name, sir?
My name is Chris. First name Chris, K-R-I-S. Nick Farr is the last name, N-I-K-F-A-R.
Elizabeth and I'm Robert Parrish, attended your Greenway meeting, I think it was in May, if I remember correctly. I'm pleased to see that a couple of the suggestions, at least that I made, have been acted upon, or maybe they were already made, but nonetheless, I'm pleased to see it. as a legally blind person, I want to ask, how many bus accessible greenways are there?
You said how many bus accessible?
Right. If I wanted to get to a greenway by bus, how many of them are? I mean, of course, they don't let me drive for some reason. Never mind, I can't see.
Well, I mean, technically all of the greenways are accessible by bus. They all have a number of bus stops that are located within not too far proximity. But really what I think the more important factor is the level of service of those bus routes that service those trails.
Okay. So if I was to go downtown and say, I don't know, I want to get to the Walnut Creek Greenway, would they be able to tell me what bus number to take?
Well, that depends on where on the Walnut Creek Trail you want to be. The Walnut Creek Trail is like 11 miles long, so depends on where you want to be and where you're going there from.
Okay, but would they be able to recognize what I'm talking about? I mean, I don't know what obviously Walnut Creek. I guess that's in what, east Raleigh area.
Walnut Creek runs along the south side of downtown, and it runs from Lake Johnson on the west all the way to the Neuse River Trail on the east.
Okay, all right. So it depends on what street. Now, you said fair distance. How long are we talking about? Because I'm a walking man.
I'm sorry, what was that?
When you say a fair distance from the Greenway, how long of a distance are we talking about?
We used a 1/4 mile and 1/2 mile distance in our analysis.
Okay, all right. Now, the second question I have for you is, I've had a question about trails that take both bikes and walkers, and I made a suggestion that it ought to be clearly marked in high contrast, by the way, markings indicating persons who are walking, that's their place to walk, and then the sign for bikers. Where is that?
Well, we are working on adding some signage now that has and we do have some signs on the system today that say like pass on the left, stay to the right, pass on the left. And the new signs that we have, they are going to have like a little graphic of a bicyclist versus a pedestrian. But we don't have any trails that are specifically for one or the other.
Okay, but if you're dealing with legally blind people who do get out there on these trails, we don't, first of all, we may not see your sign. And then second of all, if there was some indication of, colored areas for bikes, markings, and a specific color for pedestrians, that's what I was driving at.
And I think in the future, when we have maybe some wider trails than what we have today, that might be something that we can look at doing. I think that most of our trails are in the 10-foot wide width, and that's for both directions. So that means you're breaking down 5 feet of space in one direction between bikes and peds, and I think that striping that out might be probably too small of an area to be able to make that designation permanent.
Okay, and is your signage in large print?
Well, I guess that depends on what your definition of large print is.
Think 30 font per house. I don't know exactly what to tell you, but think of a person who's legally blind working your trail. Who has a 2400 vision. Would I be able to see it?
I can't answer that question, unfortunately. We have a sign package that has been adopted by the city. That's what guides what we are able to do and what we are not able to do in terms of signage. And I can send you a copy of that, and it does have the font sizes on it.
Okay, great. You want my email?
If you could give that to Eric, then he'll get that to me.
All right. Thank you, sir.
You're
I
welcome.
believe Commissioner Sell was up next.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for this presentation. I think we're all really excited to see the products of this discussion that you all have been starting. I had two quick questions. The first was pertaining to, you had mentioned that you might be changing with your development, how you might have development install some greenways, it sounds like. I was also curious about connections to the greenway. Would you have a way to help clarify that at all? I don't know why I'm echoing. Are you guys hearing me echo? I'm sorry.
A little bit, but it's not bad.
Okay.
So you were asking specifically about connections to the greenway system from development?
Correct. Like if the trail is running adjacent, is there, in addition to having a developer help install maybe a segment that's missing, would we also be having procedures to make sure that they're connecting into it?
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah, and right now, well, you may or may not know, I'm not sure, but the UDO only requires developments that have a residential component to it to dedicate space for the greenway. And I'm hoping that one of the policy recommendations to consider will probably be to expand that to other development types, but then also to have some kind of formal policy when and if a project is adjacent to the system wants to connect or would be required to connect, just like they would with the roadway network.
Okay. Well, I'll stay tuned for that and maybe can connect with you more offline to understand like all of that, because I'm interested in kind of understanding all those moving pieces. My other question was when this process is totally fleshed out, will it be proposing like new corridors for greenway placement in addition to like amenities and other features?
Yes.
Okay. And so those might deviate from like the corridors that we've already pre-selected that are kind of in our creek beds. We might be looking at scope outside of that, or?
I don't foresee any of the corridors being removed because
right.
The corridor is the environmentally protected area. Some of them are appropriate for trail development while others are not.
Okay.
There are some corridors that are in our plan now that theoretically would have a trail at some point, but we know it's not actually possible for us to get a trail in there. So we wouldn't be taking that corridor off of the plan. It would still be listed as a greenway corridor, but there may be some other area that's not currently listed as a greenway corridor that would be feasible for us to build a trail.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. And so in the spring, we'll be able to kind of see the results of these conversations that you all have had to date. Is that the timeline that we'll be able to see like a map and everything and kind of look at it from that perspective? Okay.
That's correct. Yep.
Thanks for all your work on this. I'm really excited to see.
Oh, sure. You're
welcome.
I believe Vice Chair Alley was up next.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. Love the greenway system and use it often with my two young children. I also live near the Crabtree Greenway and the kind of mess of Capitol Boulevard and Hodges. And so I hope that you all will be considering what to do during construction detours, knowing that because you're in creek beds and global warming is a thing, that you're going to have washouts, silt, all kinds of things, right? In addition to sanitary sewer construction. So there are places where the greenways function as essential transportation because there is not an effective alternate. And I think it's really important to consider collaboration with the transportation department up to the NCDOT and thinking about how we keep these corridors continuous, because otherwise you get what you have now, which is stranded recreational users trying to leapfrog Capitol Boulevard. It's really dangerous and it goes on for years. So that's my plug. Thanks.
Sure.
I had a couple questions for you. The count that, first of all, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. And there's like a ton of information here. Y'all got thrown this loop and had to do this gigantic public outreach on flying by the seat of your pants. And I think you've done a great job of pulling it off. So I really look forward to seeing the recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
the count data you had for the different greenway sections. I was wondering what year that was taken in, and if the closures along the Crabtree Greenway Trail had an impact on those.
Sure. So those counts were taken sometime between 2017 and 2019, and the reason it's listed as 365 days versus like counts for 2019 is because the counters were installed at different time periods. So we don't actually have one solid year's worth of data from all the counters at the same time. So it's just 365 data from each, the most recent from each counter that we had on the system. And the closures did not impact those counts because we have counters that are sort of being held aside to be installed on the Crabtree Creek Greenway when those construction projects are complete. So the data that you saw is actually counts that actually happened. The only thing that I would think would be different after we get the counters onto the Crabtree Creek Greenway is that the numbers will be higher.
Great. I hoped you might say that. That was a wonderful sidewalk map. I really am looking forward to digging into these maps when you release the documents. Is that city sidewalk data? I've had trouble finding the city sidewalk data before. We've had to rely on OpenStreetMap data in the past.
It was data that was obtained from our GIS department. So yes, I'd say so.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Dwight, it's out there, and I have just finished updating what I have for this year. There's a few as-built I'm still waiting for.
Cool. Well, it's been a while since I've looked into it, so I just remember last time I looked for it, I was happy to see it. I really like the slope analysis. I think that's really cool. I hadn't seen something like that done before. And you spoke about amenities versus necessities, and I think that might play into what Vice Chair Alley was discussing about relying on these corridors for access. I was wondering, you said it broke down by the demographics. Could you expand on that a little bit? Which communities in particular? Can you separate that out at this point?
Sure. I mean, it was definitely, it didn't really come up until we started doing our direct outreach to the minority groups, to that list of 40 different organizations. Because we were trying to figure out, like, we're doing all of this outreach. We're trying everything we can to get people from groups who are typically underrepresented to participate. And part of that is finding out why they wouldn't participate. And so that was a question that was asked, and that was the response that we got. And that was from multiple of those different groups.
Great. Thank you very much. I don't have any more questions.
Okay.
I have one more question, if I'm permitted.
Please go ahead.
Sorry, I can't see where that raised hand symbol is, Dwight.
I wouldn't have seen it anyway. Don't worry.
Yeah. Safety was discussed at that meeting in May. I even made the suggestion that people might, go as incognito, just to make sure everything's safe in terms of people being attacked or what have you. What's been done on that front?
So for us, as far as like park staff, we don't have anything that we can do in terms, like legally, in terms of law enforcement. What we can do is we can address the issues of behavior while you're on the system, using the system as a cyclist or a pedestrian. We do have close communications with RPD and trying to get them to do more rounds actually on the system.
Good.
But really, they should be treating the Greenway system just like they do any other public piece of infrastructure. The same way that they would treat the sidewalks or the roads throughout the system.
Right, and I asked that question in light of, it has been the news of several events on these trails. And, I'm glad to hear that you guys do involve RPD. And by the way, great presentation.
Thank you.
And I don't believe that you're looking for a vote, or would you like a vote of approval at this time moving forward, or is this just an informational check-in at this point?
Yeah, this is just an informational check-in.
All right. Well, I think that this is great. I look forward to seeing more come out of this, and good luck.
Okay, thank you very much. If any of you have any questions that come up after this meeting, just touch base with Eric and he'll get to me and we will get back whatever information is you need.
Thank you very much. All right, next up on the agenda, we have Transportation Planning Manager Eric Lamb with a pedestrian update. Eric, how long do you think this presentation will take?
I am going to try and go through this as quickly as I can. And most of you are familiar with the topics and things I'm going to cover, so I'm going to move quickly through this, if that's okay.
Wonderful. Let's go. I think we might take a break afterwards, stretch our legs.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay, can everyone see my presentation all right? Okay, very good. So this was a presentation, a status update that I gave to the City Council back in September. And I had a couple of commissioners suggested that the commission would like to see that. So I'm just going to run through the same presentation today. So let me talk about where we've been as a city historically. And a number of years ago, an organization called Transportation for America started publishing a nationwide survey of safety data called Dangerous by Design. And their emphasis was to identify communities that had high pedestrian crash rates, and they used a means of ranking those cities. And when this was first done, you'll notice that the Raleigh-Cary metro area came in as number 6 in the country for worst for pedestrians. And this was the 2007-2008 timeframe. And a couple things that are important to note from this. Oh, hang on 1 second. There we go. So this caused a strong reaction for us when this came out. Now, it's important to point out that the Raleigh-Cary metro area is actually comprised of Wake County, Johnston County, and Franklin County. And so it's not just Raleigh. But the fact of the matter is that Raleigh made up over 40% of the crashes that accounted for the crash rate for the metro area. So it's something we certainly have the responsibility for. And Transportation for America uses a danger index that they try and, the math they apply is looking at how many pedestrian deaths there are per population, and then they use that against percentage of walking trips, which is gained from census data. So it's not an exact science, but it does an okay job of putting everybody on equal footing and making these evaluations. But it was really when, this was the front page of the News Observer after this report went live. And the photo here is a pretty accurate representation of what a pedestrian's experience was trying to cross Capitol Boulevard. And this set a number of things into motion that created both the BPAC as an entity shortly thereafter, and then also created what is now Paul Black's position as Bicycle and Pedestrian Manager. We want to look at these numbers in the context of what's going on nationally. And unfortunately, we're not alone in the rankings as far as what's happening with pedestrian deaths nationwide. We've gotten to a low point in 2009. And then since that time, pedestrian crashes have been steadily increasing. And some of that you can track relative to increases in driving. And so the chart in blue shows the number of pedestrian fatalities, and the line bar in red shows the national vehicle miles traveled. And again, there was a low point in the recession. The traffic nationally actually went down a little bit. But you can see it doesn't completely correlate to VMT. And so there's just been this general trend all along these last 10 years that there's been a disproportionate increase in the number of fatalities when you look at it based on the national statistics. One other interesting phenomena is that there's a crossover point in 2015, and the line that's in blue shows rural fatalities, and the line in red is urban fatalities. And in 2015, for the first time, it crossed over that there were then more pedestrian crashes and fatalities in urban areas than there were in rural. So that's been a big changing trend. When we look at Raleigh specifically, this bar in gold represents the fatal and what we call the Class A crashes, and then everything else in the blue is all pedestrian crashes. So 2019 was the worst year on record in Raleigh for pedestrian fatalities. You can see the bar is steadily increasing with some peaks and lulls to it. Same is true for fatalities. When you look at this, you normalize it against our population, that trend flattens out for pedestrian crashes in total. But you can see the last 3 years, from 2017 to 2019, has shown a slight increase over prior years with the total number of fatal and serious crashes. But like I said, when you average it out for population per capita, the numbers are actually relatively pretty consistent over that same period. So when we look at, this is a heat map that shows concentrations of pedestrian crashes across the city. It's not completely surprising that the core of the city and the area in West Raleigh around NC State have the highest density of crashes. And part of that correlates to the fact that that's where we have the most people walking. You can take a subset of that map and look at the crashes. And typically as we do crash analyses, we're looking at the most recent 3 years of data that we have. And you can see the distribution of crashes all over the city, but again, significant concentrations in the downtown area, along Hillsborough Street and the university area, and also out along New Bern Avenue. And then you can see certain corridors also with some concentrations of crashes. So as we get into detail on a quarter by quarter basis, there's been some change in this list over the past few years. When you look at previous crash statistics, we did a lot of work on Hillsborough Street because at one point it was the highest pedestrian crash concentration in the city. And that concentration still exists, but it's gone down from where it was before. New Bern Avenue now as a whole is actually the most risky corridor as it relates to pedestrian crashes. And that's just by the net total crashes. Now, if you take it and we can analyze that 2 different ways, this is ranked just showing how many crashes we have in that corridor. But when you break it down by the density of crashes on a per mile basis, it's actually a different story. And so McDowell and Dawson Street are the 2 highest rated streets when it comes to crashes on a per mile basis. And then you see a number of the other streets within downtown with Blunt Street and Davie Street. New Bern Avenue is still sticking towards the top of this list here. So as we identified who our stakeholders were for talking about developing improvements for pedestrian safety, as we look internally, we've got our transportation department, our engineering services department, our transit division, police department, planning and development, and we consider BPAC to be one of those sort of internal stakeholders. As we look outward, NCDOT being one of the major stakeholders with maintaining a certain amount of the major street system is part of that, as well as the public health community has started to become more engaged over the past decade, looking at pedestrian safety and walkability as a public health crisis. And that brings a welcome and different perspective to the conversation. And then also the general public at large. So this is where I think you're going to recognize a lot of what we talk about in terms of what are we doing. In 2013, the pedestrian plan was approved by the city council, and that gave us our master plan strategy for improving pedestrian safety and accessibility. The city adopted a complete streets policy in 2015, and we've taken that to heart in terms of incorporating complete streets methodologies into all of our transportation projects and into our maintenance work as well. We've also done a lot to update our crosswalk standards more uniformly now, using the high visibility crosswalks, both at signalized intersections and where we have mid-block crossings. And we've done a lot of retrofits as we've done both resurfacing work and other work, especially in the downtown locations where, again, we have our highest frequency of crashes. ADA, we talked about that a little bit earlier with the Greenway system. That's a big requirement for us as we look at improvements to the sidewalk system. We began in the mid-1990s, shortly after the city's ADA policies were adopted. And what we had done was to incorporate retrofits of our sidewalk system into our resurfacing program. So theoretically, the city will resurface every street over a cycle. And as we do each of those streets for resurfacing, we're also using that mobilization to address any updates to our handicap ramps and whatnot. What's interesting is that now what you're seeing is we're basically coming up on a second round of those improvements, as the initial implementation of ADA has now been supplanted by newer ADA requirements. So as part of that, as we go through and do those maintenance changes and resurface these streets again, even if they already have handicap ramps, now we have to do better handicap ramps that are more in keeping with current ADA requirements. But just as a point of reference to the amount of work that we're doing, there were 342 ramps that were upgraded in 2019 at a cost of about $1.2 million. You're familiar with our conversations previously about leading pedestrian intervals. And so for those that might be listening, an LPI basically gives a pedestrian a head start before the intersection lights turn green. And what it does is it allows for the pedestrians to enter the intersection before the cars do, and allows for better visibility and establishment for pedestrians in line of sight. So we now have these at over 80 intersections across the city. Most of these are concentrated within the downtown area right now. The yellow shows some of the existing LPIs, a bunch of on the green, specifically on state maintained streets. So you can see the Dawson, McDowell, and Blunt and Person corridors as having been installed recently. But then in red, you can see we have a number of those LPIs also on deck around Hillsborough, Morgan Street, Glenwood Avenue, and P Street. We're also now starting to more regularly use rectangular rapid flash beacons. Some of these had gotten hung up in deployment due to some lawsuits on their patent rights. Those have all been resolved, and now we can use them freely. One of the things that we are also doing with these is at locations where we identify the need for more advanced systems, we are putting these in as an interim measure, because we can deploy these relatively quickly at locations and get them in and get them wired. Obviously, something like a pedestrian signal is more capital intensive and more physically involved with installing. So this makes for a good interim treatment. And so you can see one that we've done here at the intersection of the House Creek Greenway at Blue Ridge Road. And what happens is pedestrians press a button and it activates the beacon. The pedestrian doesn't actually get a walk sign per se, but what it does is it raises drivers' awareness that there's a pedestrian that's looking to cross the intersection. And that creates a better compliance with stopping. Talking about pedestrian signals, one of the other things that we've done more of in the past few years is the installation of HAWK signals. HAWK stands for High Intensity Activated Crosswalk. We currently have about 10 HAWK locations across the city, with 7 more that are on tap. And we've got pending installations of HAWKs along New Bern at Carver, Gorman Street and Walnut Street, Walnut Creek Greenway, also the Walnut Creek Greenway crossing at Sunnybrook Road. I think the one on the Hillsborough Street YMCA, if it's not activated, it's close to it. There'll be one on Tryon Road at Parr Drive that will be installed as part of the widening project that we have underway on Tryon Road right now, and then one out by Barwell Road Elementary School. A relatively simple treatment that we started doing more widespread applications of is median refuges. And this is a good recent example that was just installed last year on Wake Forest Road in the right in the border between Mordecai and Oakwood. And again, when you've got a center turn lane and a T intersection, it makes for a very easy space to be able to install that and turn these locations where pedestrians cross the street into simple two-stage crossings. So really substantial improvement in the accessibility and safety of these. We've also started to do more with lighting. One of the things that the city wrapped up a couple years ago was converting all of our street lights to LED lighting. We went from a high pressure sodium, which is a little more of a yellowy type light, to LED lights, which are white. And as a result of that, one of the benefits is there's greater visual acuity for when you're walking or driving at night to be able to see better. We've also gone through and worked with NCDOT to do some locations where we do lighting under the overpasses of certain bridges, and that really does a lot to improve the environment in those situations. We've talked previously at this commission about work zone safety and the work we've done to try and improve accessibility through work zones, both for capital projects and for development projects. You've seen our examples. We've talked about this at great length before. We spend a lot of our time and effort on sidewalk construction, and I think it's no surprise to the commission that we include sidewalks now as part of all of our city capital projects. We also work with NCDOT to include that as part of all of their projects. Historically, the city has paid for a portion of those sidewalk costs on DOT projects, and they've been considered a betterment. DOT recently approved a complete streets policy update that suggests that cities will no longer have to pay for those elements in DOT projects. And so we have not had our next round of project developments under that new policy yet, but I'm excited about that prospect of including that infrastructure as basically by right with their projects. With the 2017 transportation bond, we allocated a record amount of funding for sidewalks. A standalone amount of $14 million was dedicated for new sidewalk construction, both for city-initiated projects and for resident-initiated petition projects. That doesn't account for all of the other locations in the transportation bond where sidewalk money may be used, such as on our major capital projects. So there's actually more than 14 million, but 14 million is what was dedicated. We've also been very successful at pursuing additional funding through the Metropolitan Planning Organization, CAMPO, and through NCDOT. We've got some projects that are coming up. Some of you are familiar with the work that NCDOT is getting ready to do at the Wake Forest Road interchange. It's going to do some sidewalk widening through there. The Falls of Neuse Road project that NCDOT is undertaking north of 540 will include new sidewalks. And then there's a significant project that's out in the Briar Creek area in northwest Raleigh, and it will convert that portion of Glenwood Avenue to a freeway from 540 out to the Durham County line. And there's also similar work underway planning for similar freeway conversion on the Durham County side of the fence that would convert it to a freeway from Wake County all the way to the new East End connector that's just about completed. So there's no sidewalks that go in typically as part of freeway projects, but what we've emphasized is the need to make sure that we have good sidewalk connections for all the streets that cross. So as part of the new overpasses that are constructed in the interchanges that go in at Briar Creek Parkway and at TW Alexander and at the Aviation Parkway extension, there will be new sidewalks included as part of all of those bridge projects. Just to give you a frame of reference for how much we've been doing in the last 5 years, we've completed almost 3 miles of petition projects. We have another 2 miles worth that are under construction now. Those are just petition projects that are requested by residents. For our capital sidewalk projects that are city initiated, we have over 7 miles of completed projects and another 1.6 that are under construction. I think we've talked before about the Safe Routes to Schools program. We have some dedicated funding for the transportation bond. One of our biggest efforts has been doing some retrofits around the Leesville School campus. If you're not familiar with that campus, it includes both the high school, middle school, and elementary school. And so we're working to add new sidewalks and crosswalks that connect that school better to the surrounding community as part of that project. We will also be participating in the cost of some new neighborhood access going into Kahn Elementary. I believe a couple of you are familiar with that conversation regarding a pedestrian bridge that connects into Belvedere Park. And so we'll be a partner with Wake County on that improvement. We've also been working to update our street design standards. A big policy shift for us in 2013 moved us back to having sidewalks required on both sides of all streets. Up until that point, sidewalks were just required on one side of the street. And so we also updated street standards in 2015. And one of the things that we did was working on reducing the design speeds that we, our target speeds that are what we designed to for many of our streets and drop those down. And it formally established 25 miles per hour as the standard for all residential streets and any type of main street we have in the city. So we talked about the Dangerous by Design report at the beginning. I'm happy to report that since that initial report came out in 2009, our region has continued to improve its ranking every year. So we are down, not even in the top 25 anymore as of 2016. And of the 2019 report, we were down to 31st. And you can see that trend showing positively. Slight uptick in the 2019 numbers as far as the danger index goes, but we are making substantial improvements. And I think we've referenced this before that we applied for the Walk-Friendly Cities, Walk-Friendly Communities status for the first time, and we were very happily surprised that to receive silver level designation as part of our first outing. And I want to thank B Person. B did the lion's share of the work on developing that application and pulling that information together for us and did an excellent job, and we got really good feedback. This is a program that's administered by the UNC Highway Safety Research Program, and they were very supportive of our application. So what's next? So many of you participated in some of the walkability assessments that Paul Black took folks on to look at some problem areas and look at issues on the ground. And we're going to continue to do those in key areas. We recently completed some work on a pedestrian safety audit for the northern half of downtown. This was on the heels of a pedestrian fatality that took place at the intersection of Lane and McDowell. And a lot of feedback from state employees in that part of town that were really upset with the conditions that have taken place there, and got a lot of support from various state agencies to look at making some changes. And so NCDOT developed a program to go through and look at what it would take to make a significant number of improvements. And so looking at some both low cost and higher cost efforts that would be more comprehensive. But I really want to applaud DOT for getting on it and making a lot of these changes in the short term. Things are going to be immediate. Is looking at more right turn on red restrictions. There's going to be a lot of improvements to crosswalks. And we talked about Dawson McDowell earlier as being one of the toughest corridors for crash rates. One of the things that DOT is committed to working on us with, and they've already done part of this, is dropping the operating speed in through downtown. So we've already reduced what the timing of those traffic signals are, and we took advantage of the traffic reductions as the first part of the year to put that in place, and we're going to continue to look at doing more in that area. DOT also has its own high hazard program. They've identified a number of locations where they intend to have capital projects to try and improve safety. Number one on their list right now is Capitol Boulevard at Calvary up in the northeast part of town. And so we'll work with them. The Six Forks Millbrook project will be superseded by the city's Six Forks Road project. So we'll be doing the lion's share of the work there. Unfortunately, we did not have a Walktober in 2020, thanks COVID. But that's something that we have worked on, looking for more creative ways to do outreach to the community and talking about ways to improve walking and raising awareness. And we're always looking for opportunities to do that. And then right now we're spending a lot of time and effort on building our system around our transit investment. With the approval of the sales tax for transit in 2016 and the weight transit plan that came out of that, we're all in on improving the transit system and really emphasizing what does it take for us to build connections that enhance the transit system, make the transit system more accessible and more seamless. We had a sidewalk project that was in the works for New Bern Avenue that had been programmed prior to development of the BRT concept. We got about 65% design on that project, and then realized that if we got the BRT award for New Bern the way that we had hoped that we would, and we did, that project would end up ripping out the investment that we made in building sidewalks. And so we made the decision to can that project and incorporate that work with the BRT project. And so we just got notice of award late last week that the New Bern Avenue BRT project has gotten full funding from the Federal Transit Administration. And so as part of that, one of the things that we're also going to be looking at doing is looking at not just transit improvements on the mainline corridor, but we're also going to be looking at what are the side street opportunities that we can make those sidewalk installations that facilitate connections from neighborhoods directly into the transit, into the stops for the BRT. So we'll be looking at doing that soon. And then we are embarking on assessing what it takes for us to develop a Vision Zero program. And so we are now working with VHB as an engineering firm here in town that will be doing an assessment for us to look at what does it take for Raleigh to develop and implement a Vision Zero program. And so we look forward to bringing you that information in the near future. And then I mentioned that the current pedestrian plan had been updated by the City Council in 2013. We're going to look at during this round of budget if we can get funding in our capital program to be able to do what we need to do an update of that pedestrian plan in fiscal year 22. That is all that I have got. I'll be happy to answer any questions from the commission.
Commissioner Barsness.
Thanks, Eric. I was one of the people who asked for this probably like 5 times, so I appreciate it. It's really helpful. I've got a couple of kind of overarching questions, and then I've got a few or more specific questions. So I'll ask a couple, and then someone else can go, and then just come back to me. But generally speaking, do you know? I mean, it looks like the vehicle miles traveled is going up, but kind of at a different rate as the pedestrian fatalities. And nationally, it seems like there was that trend as well, starting with the lowest point during the Great Recession. And I mean, I can't believe how steep that curve is even nationally. And so my question is do experts know what is driving those increases in fatalities, or increases in crashes generally, but fatalities as well?
There's a lot of speculation about that, and I'll also defer to Paul if he wants to offer his opinion. Somebody pointed out the fact that cars have gotten safer, but people haven't.
Yeah.
So we don't have new airbags for pedestrians the way that and fancy countermeasures on cars. So couple that with the increase in traveling, I think there's also there's a theory that as the design of vehicles has changed, with the proliferation of sport utility vehicles and the trucks as part of the market share, and not just being sport utility or trucks, but those vehicles in particular have gotten bigger, and as such, the front profile of those vehicles when they strike the pedestrian, it's much taller and does a lot more damage than a smaller profile vehicle would have at one point. So when you look at how many SUVs are out there on the market and how much higher the front end of the vehicle is, leading to a worse outcome for, pound for pound, what a strike on a pedestrian would otherwise be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know we're seeing two major factors, and one is distracted driving, and one is the vehicle design. There's a great picture of a Ford F-150 from 1991 next to a brand new Ford F-150, and the top of the hood is almost 2 feet higher.
Oh, wow.
And in terms of what that does is, instead of rolling up on the hood and onto the windshield, which dissipates a lot of the crash, the new ones hit pedestrians in the torso and pull them under the vehicle.
Okay.
It's a known design issue at this point, but there's no movement to, at least at the federal level, to make any changes there.
Right. And then a follow-up, then other people ask questions, please. Do we know, like within the city of Raleigh or however you guys are collecting your statistics, what percentage of the pedestrian crashes are actually because there are not sidewalks and people don't see them as they're driving by versus people getting hit in crosswalks?
No, we have not done a deep dive in the crash data. And there would need to be multiple deep dives that are taken. So, for example, determining whether the pedestrian was in an area that had sidewalks or not, whether the pedestrian was in an area that had streetlights or not, what the conditions were, if it was day or night. And then we also have not gotten into anything like demographic or age information. So we have not had the license to be able to do that with this information yet.
Okay. Are you guys thinking, the reason I'm asking is because for me, the 2 or 3 times I've almost been hit by cars, I've always been in either a crosswalk or a pull out where the driver should have looked both ways when I'm crossing a street, through the sidewalk, right? When I've been running. And so, I mean, obviously that's just anecdotal, but my question is in order to help solve the problems, does it make sense to understand what's the best way to solve it? So maybe it's crossing Capitol Boulevard is where the crashes are occurring that are the most deadly. So maybe that's where you need to, I mean, I know you already have medians on Capitol, so it's not a great example, but I like the idea of you guys putting in those raised medians so people can take a break. But you see my point, because if it's really like missing sidewalks and people are walking home for whatever reason late at night and the person doesn't see them, it's a different issue to solve than if the real issue is crosswalks. Or maybe it's, I mean, to your point, I mean, I know it's complicated, but I just see a lot of value in collecting that data. I don't know how expensive or reliable the data would be, but it's just, I don't know, to me it seems to make a lot of sense to help prioritize how you spend your funding on this particular issue.
Yeah, we actually have some of that, and there was some analysis done with the DOT study. I can put a link in the chat so folks can follow along with that.
Okay.
It doesn't go into a great deal of detail, but we do have the ability to break that out from the police reports in most cases.
Okay.
But it requires, in many cases, for someone to go through each police report and review the schematic of how the accident happened. And that's something that police officers are trained to do, whether they're local police, sheriff, or highway patrol, and they fill out a crash report. They have to include a diagram. And so from that, along with other conditions, but it's manual intensive. It's not, that part is not automated yet.
Okay.
Sounds like a nice volunteer opportunity.
I was thinking intern.
I'm thinking us. Just make the data available. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Can't help it.
Dwight, you're muted.
Was that Commissioner Hester with her hand up there, or was that just a? Oh, okay. Sorry. Eric,
I was laughing, but I find this really interesting.
You mentioned you'd not been granted license to analyze the data in that way yet. Did you mean to imply that you might still be granted license to analyze the data in that way? And who would grant that license?
Well, it's really a matter of staff resources at this point, and that's where, like, seriously, it would take something like an intern for an entire summer pouring through. And I say that having done that early in my career with other crash data sets, and it took me an entire summer to go through a number of accidents and correlate them. So.
Yeah. Now, the bike ped unit at DOT pulls out the subset of all of the crashes around the state and does a little bit of that work, but you can only take it so far, again, because it's very labor intensive to do.
And that's where, from a Vision Zero approach, you really do have to take the deep dive and looking at each corridor and looking at what your accident crash profiles are and understanding why the crashes are taking place, because that really does dictate specific sets of countermeasures that are almost more surgical in a way. I think what we've talked about in terms of, again, we have so many places where we just don't even have sidewalks. And as we've seen the crash rate go down along Capitol Boulevard in locations where we've added sidewalks, for example, north of Spring Forest, that was a substantial improvement that we made out there.
I noticed in your presentation, Eric, broke down the most dangerous corridors by the total number of crashes and fatalities along the corridor and the total number of crashes per mile, and you get different metrics. Is there any way to get towards an estimate or normalization of the danger from the perspective of the user? Like, so normalize it per the number of crossings or the number of trips taken by foot? Because that's how we look at vehicle crashes, is the number, like, 1 million miles traveled, number of crashes. And it would, I think it would help us direct our resources differently than just looking at total numbers, because downtown might be one of the safest places to walk.
That's a great point when you start dealing with the statistics, and the one thing that we don't have is uniform data that shows pedestrian volumes at multiple places across the city, and so that is part of the denominator that you're talking about there that creates that normalization. But you're technically correct. People talk about New York City can be argued as being the most hazardous place for pedestrians in America and the safest place for pedestrians in America, because you look at the sheer total number of crashes, New York is out of the ballpark. But when you normalize that by the population of New York on a per capita basis, it has one of the lowest pedestrian crash rates in the country. So you're right.
Could use density probably wouldn't serve as a very good proxy for it either, because downtown's going to have the density, and those will correlate. Yeah. Vice Chair Alley?
I believe the existing PED plan certainly doesn't get us at PED counts, but uses some placeholders for demand drivers. So not just locations, but it also looks at things like census data on carless households and poverty and concentration of employment, low wage employment, things like that. I mean, as much as walking is a joyful activity, it is also the mode of last resort oftentimes. And so I fear that if we looked at like the VMT equivalent, it might not make a better case for PEDs, but I think it's one of those things that like it should be considered like a universal right, like housing or something like that. Like, we certainly need to look at strategic use of our scarce resources. But yeah, PED plan's got some juicy stuff in there.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to, at some point, again, it's really hard to tease out from the data, but to go through and look at more of the demographic information involved. What's our age profile like in our community for crash rates? We don't have that information at hand.
I've always been so curious, because the plan is getting long in the tooth. If you did that heat mapping as our city changes, as poverty gets suburbanized and neighborhoods get gentrified, like whether or not our places of walking as primary mode would shift. I mean, my fear is that it's in places like mini city now more than it used to be. Which, might have less density, but if you hit a car going 45 miles an hour, you're dead. So
if you normalize it by density, it might help tease some of that out and take the emphasis off of downtown. And you could look at number of crashes per mile per 1,000 residents or whatever the unit was. I did have another question here. This is more of a comment and a plea. I really like what we're doing with all the mitigations, but it's all mitigation. And you know, if you look at the hierarchy of OSHA or whatever for like to stop injury, you remove the thing that causes the injury. And I would like part of this conversation to be reducing VMT. We're not there yet as a city, but this is where the talk's got to start. And I would make a plea with staff to start thinking about what that could look like. Yes, Commissioner Hatchell.
And I hope you can share it with us maybe one day. But the dangerous by design that you mentioned, which kind of got us into this, looking at it this way, which is kind of a good thing. They do talk about people of color, the elderly and non-English speaking people as being the highest risk. So I guess I'm wondering, how did they do that? And then what are we going to do that deep? How can we do that deep dive? Is that a Vision Zero plan? You know, what you know, you said next step. What are we? I think we're doing great. We're making a lot of progress, and that's a good thing. But there's still huge amounts of, you know, pedestrian accidents, crashes, and there are still a lot of fatalities and very serious, you know, things. So I guess what I would like to know is, how did Dangerous by Design get that data in the communities, in our community or anywhere else? How did they decide that? And then
the answer is,
what are we going to do?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how T4A, you know, Transportation for America, got their demographic breakdowns. If it's based on federal highways information or whatnot. I think that from a resource standpoint, again, re-engaging a consultant to do an updated pedestrian plan for us, this is exactly the type of thing that we should be having them do for us as an assessment.
Okay. All right. Well, like I was going to say, I mean, you know, they basically ranked us 6th a long time ago, and then now they're ranking us much better. But they must, I guess I'm saying they must have that data on us.
Well, that's not based on demographic data. That's just based on raw crash data. So the formula for that, yeah, I put the formula up earlier, and I won't share my screen again. But the formula for that, well, let me see, I've lost it. There we go. It was the pedestrian deaths, just fatalities, divided by the population, multiplying that number by 100,000, and then dividing it all by a percentage of walking trips. And that number, that denominator, comes from what's it called? ACS,
American Community Survey.
American Community Surveys on walkability, and that data, that's probably the loosest part of their formula, because the ACS data is real inconsistent based on who the census surveys for that information. So.
Thank you. And the other thing, did you say council asked you for this update?
We had a request to provide an update on what we were doing in terms of addressing pedestrian safety. Yes, ma'am.
That's excellent as well. I'm hoping, you know, we've made great stride in 14 years. I'm hoping we can be a little bit more exponential in addressing this, and I think we probably are. But I think, you know, just being as aggressive as we can. Like you said, they're not making airbags for pedestrians. Thanks.
Commissioner Hester now. Yes.
Yeah, now I really have a question. Can you talk a little bit more, Eric, about like what happens with Vision Zero, like what the next steps are for that, if it's possible, like where you are in that process?
Sure. So we are just in the process of getting under contract with a consultant to do that assessment for us. And VHB has done this work for other communities. And what it will do is to show us, and for us to be able to show the community, what does a successful Vision Zero program look like? I am familiar with Vision Zero programs nationally and internationally. And one of the things that I have seen as a negative for domestic Vision Zero programs has been either an unwillingness or an inability to do more of the engineering capital intensive fixes on some of these streets, and have resorted instead more towards almost a marketing type approach, looking at campaigns for safety. And what's interesting is you're now seeing, as a result of some of the conflicts that have taken place over the last year, you're now seeing enforcement removed from some of the conversations about Vision Zero and other safety type programs. In fact, we were talking about this with staff the other day, that's now been removed. Enforcement programs are no longer part of the bike-friendly city or walk-friendly city application process. And part of it is, if you look historically at cities across the country, some of the areas with the highest crash rates are also in some of the largest minority concentration areas of the city. And what you would not want to have in the current environment is a situation where you're ramping up enforcement and looking like effectively a police crackdown for safety that is well-intentioned, but not serving the needs of the community at large. And so, you're going to see communities move away from that. But really, where the European programs have been successful is they've re-engineered the streets. And frankly, there's an American sensibility that everyone's got a God-given right to a left turn, and that when you look at taking away and making those restrictions on public streets, our current culture does not go over very well. So what we want to look at is we want to look at communities that have struck that balance domestically and developed successful programs that have got a track record for reducing crashes. And I'll be the first to admit I'm a shameless thief. I'm gonna model whatever we do after those successful communities.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm glad to hear we're not just talking about a marketing plan, even though I am a marketer. I know that's not going to solve the problem.
And it has value. We have participated,
sure, but,
working with NCDOT and folks on the Watch For Me NC campaign. And I think that was done well and rolled out over a multi-year period. But again, as we look at our crash rates, and 2019 being the worst year on record, it's hard to point to that campaign and say that we've been effective at reducing that crash outcome.
Eric, I have.
Sorry.
This is Robert. I have a question that may not be as critical, but it's important for those who might apply to. Had a legally blind friend of mine ask about sidewalks that are very narrow. She uses a wheelchair, and she thought it would be helpful to herself and others if sidewalks that are very narrow could, on one side, could have a tactile border placed on it. The problem is sometimes people run off these narrow sidewalks who use wheelchairs, and could be mud or it could be a safety hazard. So is there any possibility of that happening?
We've not entertained that as a design standard. One of the things that we have done in older parts of the city, you'll find sidewalks range, especially for example, the sidewalks in and around the core of the city. Older sidewalks tend to run around 4 feet in width. For a long time, our sidewalk standard was 5 feet. And then as part of the UDO update that was done and the technical standard updates, we moved to a 6 foot standard. So our sidewalks have gotten wider, and we standardized in more of the urban areas to utilize 14-foot wide sidewalks in those key areas. But as far as going and putting in an edge and some type of tactile
Yeah, tactile borders so that the wheel of the chair can feel it. Or maybe even a white cane user could feel it.
That would be tricky relative to stormwater, just at first blush.
Oh,
Because
okay.
anything that creates a raised lip could create an adverse outcome relative to stormwater runoff and ponding. And I know there's already enough places around the city that have ponding problems with sidewalks as it is, just by virtue of the grass growing up. But I understand the difficulty that condition creates.
Okay, so increase in wideness of sidewalks is the main thing, and environmentally or drainage wise, it may not be as possible. Okay, all right. Thanks a lot.
Commissioner Barsness, I believe I saw your hand up next.
Yeah, thanks. So just another, I guess, question, maybe follow up as well. So I know that you got the Vision Zero policy, and you said you've hired a consultant. They're going to do an assessment. But obviously, you guys have been doing over the years a number of improvements. And I'm going to talk more about the crosswalk thing because that's my thing. Because that's where I seem to almost get hit. I'll get my soapbox, I promise. But anyway, can you talk a little bit about what your process is in terms of prioritizing when you know you have a particular area where there's been a number of crashes, regardless of how they occur, whether it's a sidewalk issue, lighting, crosswalk? How do you guys prioritize that? I mean, what have you guys been doing over the years to prioritize? And I'll just be honest with you, where I'm going with this is I would like to see a program where we can, as citizens, and maybe we can do this, I don't know, I'm still learning a lot, where we can say, well, I cross Clark Avenue every single day because I walk to Brugger's to get my coffee, and there's a crosswalk on Clark. And so I cross Clark, and there's a crosswalk which has a bright yellow sign and the perpendicular sidewalk crossing right at, so it's at Clark and Horn. I would actually want to have crosswalks on both sides of that street, not just one. And I also like to have the bright flashing lights like they have on the streets right around state government, where they have the parking decks on one side of the street, and then you cross over, I forget, is it Salisbury? But anyway, like the bright flashing lights. So how can I, as a citizen who crosses Clark every single day, make a request into prioritize or get crosswalk improvements?
So given the limited resources that we've got, our approach so far has been to focus on the areas with the highest crash problems. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've done in working with NCDOT. Now, as part of larger projects, anytime that we are under the hood, for doing a comprehensive street improvement project, we'll look at those things on a more comprehensive basis. But for a one-off request from a citizen, the very first thing that our traffic engineering staff is going to look at is what's the crash rate at this particular location relative to all the other locations that have a high crash rate. Mm-hmm. And so, and since we have limited resources, just like we do with all of our city funded programs, we've got to focus on the locations that have the highest need. Mm-hmm. And so, while you may be entirely right that would be an appropriate thing to have at that location and would improve the experience,
right?
It just may not have enough of a crash history or a severity or a matter of exposure compared to other locations to be at the top of the list.
Right. And Elizabeth, I'm looking to you too, because I missed the last policy committee meeting, but one of the things that we've had on our agenda in the policy committee meeting is looking at sort of the policies around crosswalks. And so that's sort of why I asked that question, because it's part of all of the street improvement or sidewalk improvement or bicycle improvement things. I'm always thinking of, well, it's not just the sidewalk, it's actually the crosswalk component as well. And so do we have consistent policies that are always followed when there's a new design, and based on this type of design for the road, are you always following the policies you guys have in place to build that crosswalk? Or, I mean, I'm just trying to understand that whole process and how interact with each other. And I don't know if that was more a comment than rather a question, but anyway.
And I would say that as we are doing reconstruction of streets as part of capital projects and maintenance programs, we are doing a higher level of treatments on a regular basis now. So we're definitely moving in that direction.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And I did notice today, I was pleasantly surprised to see that we're no longer a dangerous city, or a less dangerous city. So
we're less dangerous.
We're less dangerous. So thank you.
I believe I saw Vice Chair Alley with her hand up.
Yeah, just to briefly respond to Kari, and this is something we've been talking about at in the policy committee with Jed, and talking specifically about kind of NCDOT standards and MUTCD, which is the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So those are the kind of engineering standards around road markings and signals. But also, Kari, right before you got on the commission, we reviewed an update to the city's streets manual, which sets out kind of some more specific policies as they pertain to the city, and kind of design details like using a ramp type driveway so that you don't have those constant sidewalk interruptions and cars have to go over the sidewalk, which makes them slow down, things like that. So yes, it has been very much a focus of VPAC and will continue to be one.
Thank you for letting me have the opportunity to present this information, and I look forward to making more progress.
Thank you, Eric. That was great. I propose that we take a 15-minute break and come back at 8 o'clock. Everybody come stretch their legs, and we will jump right into thinking about the meeting calendar and the retreat. So we've been talking about the retreat. So
15, is that possible?
What's that?
Do we want a full 15-minute break? That seems really long to me. Sorry.
Well, last time I tried for 5 and it took everybody 10, and I was thinking it's what is it? 12 till? 13 till?
That's fine.
We can come back
too late.
at 7:57. We will come back at 7:57.
All right. Thanks, Troy.
10 minutes. to start this one off? I can begin the discussion.
I am actually going to let Mr. Black drive this one.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, excellent.
So not much to it. Everything is at its normally scheduled third Monday, except for next month, which is moved ahead by 1 week for the Martin Luther King holiday. So our regular meeting would be on the 11th rather than the normal third Thursday. So we'd want you to go ahead and approve that tonight. The other one, though, that's a little bit longer is discussion of what we want to do for the BPAC retreat. And I will probably have to lean on Eric at some point as our IT support for this if we choose to try and do something. Normally we use Teams on our day-to-day work. WebEx is an extra thing that IT handles, and Eric has just kind of graciously stepped in and learned it so that we could run our meetings. He does get some support from the IT department, but he is really our IT guy for these meetings. So doing something on WebEx where we need a public-facing component is a little bit more complicated than just setting up a meeting on Teams.
I think the other thing that we're sensitive to is knowing that the commission's retreat normally takes place in February. We're still going to be in a COVID pandemic type environment for the foreseeable future, at least until the second quarter of 2021. So we're sensitive to the fact that trying to do a retreat, in a virtual format may be a bit much. The retreat's always been a very productive time for the commission, and we wanted to get your feeling on if we should just plan to hold a conventional meeting with February and look at putting off the retreat to a future date, or if there was something that we could consider from an online standpoint that wouldn't end up being a 6-hour Zoom meeting, basically. But I think we're really open to the commission's direction on what to do on this.
So we started a discussion with the committee heads about this and talking to Vice Chair Alley, and I had been kind of down on the idea of virtual conferences at the first part of this year, but I'd heard some positive feedback, specifically some of the folks on this commission. And so I asked for their input and thought if we could pull this off. I did also ask Eric and Paul, what our resources were, and I got my answer. We got Eric, and I really appreciate it, Eric. I know it's not easy running these kind of meetings, so I didn't know that you're actually pulling that off yourself. So kudos and thank you.
You're muted.
When it works right, it's great.
But so Nick asked me, well, what do you want out of the retreat, Dwight, so that we can give our feedback, and he stumped me. The retreats have always been really great, but I didn't have a very clear idea of what I was looking for here and how I wanted to marry the technology that we have available to us to the ideas that we're trying to push forward. So I've been pondering it, and I don't have a very clear idea still. So I thought we'd talk about it here. I'd love to hear what everybody has to think. And Susan had her hand up, so let's start with her.
Yeah, I would just like to say, I think I don't know if I was one of the people that told you, I've attended a lot of conferences, 1, 2, and 3-day conferences, and they do get exhausting in this format. So I would suggest that we just kind of really think about having a regular meeting plus maybe 1 additional hour or something of that nature that is specific to one topic, so that I would kind of like to think of us staying as focused as possible, because doing this meeting always takes a long time, because the format makes everything longer. So I would suggest that we do try for a retreat, but maybe we try to really focus on 1 to 2 topics that we could, be, instead of it being all the reports and things that we've done in the past.
So in the past, the retreats have been chances for us to create our strategies and dig into issues that need a little bit more time than we normally have at a meeting for a regular presentation. And looking at the issues that we have in the committees, I'm pretty happy with, I'd always love us to do more, but we're busy, we're full, and we're doing productive work in the committees. I don't think we have any big reports or presentations that are coming up in the committees that need you know, a 1 hour presentation and in detail discussion focused on it. But I would love to hear back from the committee heads if that's otherwise. But I think that, Susan, your idea is great. I would love for us to have something a little bit different from the normal scheduled meeting, and I don't know where I'd like that focus to be. One of my ideas was to throw out there was maybe some exercise for us to get to know each other better, because we've had change on the commission and this has been virtual, and we don't get the kind of interaction that we normally get. So I wouldn't mind some kind of team building if we had time for that. Can we do a walk? Is there any way that we can hold some sort of appropriate, yeah, can we do a walk? I guess I'll put it that simply.
I think technically, as we've talked about gatherings, and specifically when we were looking at the walk reviews, we consulted with other staff to determine what our parameters were. The feedback was, as long as we're in compliance with the governor's directive on gatherings of people, that's going to control, and whatever's in place at the time that the commission would have such a meeting. And I want to say that number is 10 currently.
Commissioner Sell?
So I just have two suggestions. You know, if you are going to keep it virtual, I think there are ways to keep it snappy and just keep it on, you know, as far as thinking about timeline, just having succinct expectations sent to presenters on like the amount of time that you want appropriated for them to speak. I mean, of course we have conversation afterwards, but if there's a way to just keep it tight, I think that if you have to stay virtual. The other thought is if you push it into March, maybe you could do an outdoor type of, I mean, maybe you could, if everybody was spread out with plenty of distance, and there was the ability to also do virtual for folks that might not feel comfortable coming, that would be another thought. That might be more productive than a walking people, unless you're just thinking about that from like a conversation touching point. But maybe there'd be a way to set out an outdoor table or something. Weather pending.
That would be great.
This is Robert. I couldn't quite tell who was speaking. I support the idea of looking at March with proper distancing, but I'd love the idea of the walk. I mean, yeah, so that's the only difference I have, but I like the idea of seeing each other for real, and I wouldn't have any trouble with my video then.
So I just looked online, Mr. Chair, and the governor's restrictions are 10 people indoors, but 50 people outdoors.
Commissioner Hatchell.
Yeah, I would just, I have some concerns about actually saying we're going to go for a walk. Because when I've gone on walks with 3 and 4 people, we find that when you start talking and you're wearing a mask and all this stuff happens, the next thing you know, everybody starts moving together. So I actually have some concerns about going for a walk with more than maybe 2 or 3 people. So if our subgroups wanted to meet outdoors, I think that makes sense. But it makes me a little concerned that with cold weather and masks and walking, I'm not sure we get anything done. That's why I would prefer to think about just a normal meeting, and then maybe we do take a 15-minute break or something of that nature, and then we really do, you know, perhaps like I love the idea of getting to know people, because I don't really know a lot of the people I don't know them well, you know. I mean, and like you say, there's no way to really do that now. And then maybe we take one topic for a deep dive, and try to keep moving. But I'll just say I'm a little skeptical about the ability to walk and remain distant and actually accomplish something.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't think we would accomplish much if we were walking. It would be more to walk together. Commissioner Hester?
I had sort of an idea around content for this meeting, depending on whatever we sort of come out on. But I'd like to hear, and I don't know who the appropriate person is. Maybe it's our city council liaison, but I'd really like to hear about some of these upcoming big projects that the city is working on. In particular, I'm thinking around like downtown South and how bike ped planning and what we can do as a committee, and how I just kind of like to know, a little bit more around like what's being said if we're asking for concessions from developers and talking about public financing for large scale projects. So that's just an idea I had for, but I don't think that lends itself to a walk, unfortunately.
It lends itself to a boxing match, it sounds like.
No opinion. I just want to hear where we're going or what the thought process is.
And Ms. Hester, historically speaking, the commission has invited the council liaison to participate in retreats.
Yeah, I thought that was the case. I unfortunately missed last year. So.
Yes, Commissioner Barsness.
Thank you. Liz, I think that's a great idea. I'd love to hear about major projects as well. It's such a hot topic. One thing we could, if we have more than one, I don't know what we would talk about in the retreat, but Liz, what you suggested is good. And if we do have more than like one deep dive topic, I don't know, maybe we have 2 or 3. One option is to schedule 2 or 3, depending on the topic, like 1-hour meetings. Because I'll be honest with you, these the BPAC meetings that we have are the longest Zoom meetings I do, and I have a hard time focusing. It's also Monday night, and I'm exhausted, and they sometimes go 3 hours. And that's not a criticism to say they shouldn't go 3 hours. I'm just saying I think it's really hard for me. And so I like the idea, if we're going to have a deep dive or 2 or 3, that we break it up by more than even a 15-minute break. Maybe it's even like a 30-minute lunch would be great.
Yeah, we could get creative. I don't know how creative people want to get, but there's nothing to say, since we don't have transportation costs, like a series of meetings across the span of a week.
The other thing that has been a hallmark of the retreats in the past has been they have been afternoon meetings. So we've lined them up traditionally from 1 to 5 p.m.
Commissioner Hester, I believe you.
If we just thinking about formatting again, Eric, does this platform allow for breakout sessions?
I don't believe WebEx does, but I know that's a hallmark of Zoom. I know that you can do that with Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
And perhaps we could arrange to get the Zoom platform made available. I know that our transit staff has access to that.
Yeah, I just know that for like moving something along, like if we did decide we wanted to do a deep dive, we could do the potential of a breakout and have people come and report back. It makes it a little more interactive, just a smaller group, and you're not, I don't know, just thinking about, like Susan, I also have attended many virtual conferences, and the breakout sessions seem to work really well.
They're actually great for networking as well. That's where I've used, it's actually the only time I've used breakout is for networking, and they're great for that. Or getting to know your commissioners.
We could try it for that format, actually. That's a good point. Like we could, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just say, I think doing a breakout for get to know your fellow commissioners, and you can do 2 or 3 breakouts and then eventually talk with everyone.
Commissioner Alley. Vice Chair Alley, pardon me.
You can call me whatever. A thought on a potential topic that might lend itself to kind of quicker meetings and breakout groups is, I don't know if we ever got like a full report out from that unconference that many of us attended. But it was exciting. It was a really good day, and I'm certain that we have like a traditional business that we need to attend to, but it might be nice to kind of imagine some possibilities both for our commission and then the collaboration between commissions. It was a great day, and I hate to see those ideas just get dust. So many of them had to deal with BPAC.
We can bring that up.
That feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah, we can bring that up.
Like, oh yeah, we did do that.
And it would probably have to work through him to find, or Eric, you're welcome to take that on, but I think that steps outside of the transportation department to the higher levels of city management. I'd be happy to ask Jonathan to look into that. I think he would be happy to.
This is Robert again. I have a question for Elizabeth. When you said that you'd like to see a developer come, what did you mean?
Repeat that again, please, Robert.
I think you said something about having the possibility of a developer come to our retreat.
That wasn't me.
Oh.
I think that might have been about downtown south. It was contemplated that maybe we would hear about big development projects coming up.
Okay.
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Well, I have a thought, and it may not make total sense, but here goes. Along with what was said, what is it like for a foreman on some of these projects to interact with priorities? Like people, the foreman who works on had people that work on the streets and everything. How do they interact with some of these mandates or priorities that we want? Do they have a part in it?
I think that's an interesting question. It could be like a deep dive into like how the code hits the ground, like what actually gets built and what might be hard.
Yeah.
It sounds like it might be, it certainly has a lot of BPAC things to it, but that might lend itself more to a conversation across commissions or across city departments. I know that there's the whole Development Services Advisory Committee, which is kind of not an ad hoc group, but I don't think they're appointed necessarily. But they talk about those things too. But yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, it's just a thought.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got some great ideas. In terms of calendar, do we still want to do it in February? That's question number one. And then the other one would be, do we still want to do it in the afternoon rather than in the evening with the virtual format? But it sounds like we want to do something. We just have to flesh out exactly what it is. In terms of calendar adoption, we don't need that tonight, but we want to know, sort of at least frame it up to say, okay, we're still going to do it in February, but we're going to do it after hours, or we're going to do it in March, and sure, the afternoon is great. I think if we can hammer that out today, that's all we need from the staff side.
I think that there seems to be a lot of interest in doing something in person if we can pull it off, and I think that might be more likely to be able to be done in March, just to the logistics and the weather. And I'll let everybody.
I like that idea. Personally,
speak.
I'll take away the walk.
I believe Commissioner Hatchell had her hand up first.
No, I was just going to say that I sort of feel like, if we know what we want to deal with, I would say let's go with our February afternoon date, because I don't think there's really going to be a lot of change in much of anything that's going to allow us to be close to one another in March. We're really just waiting for weather. So, it could still be a very cold, nasty Friday afternoon. So I guess I'm not, unless we're talking like April or May, I'm not an outdoor, like for hours type of girl. I would love to go for a walk. I'd love to go for something else. We can go for a bike ride, but I don't really want to pretend I'm working outdoors.
Good point.
Until it's warmer. So I would say, I would love to say we're just going to stay with our regular thing, and maybe we kind of have a 1 to 1.5 hour meeting. We're already going on 2.5 hours for this one. So maybe we try to, have our regular meeting and then have a breakout or two. I mean, we usually commit to 4 hours, and see what we can do, because I don't know. I guess I feel like it's really up to you, Dwight, is what I really feel like, because it's your year. It's your year.
All right. Well, I like a proposal that was just sent to me by Commissioner Neptune. It fits in really well with what you're saying, and I don't want to step on everybody else's toes. I believe Commissioner Sell and Commissioner Alley had their hands up. Who still wants to talk? No. Okay. He suggested a kind of a 1-day retreat schedule with an optional lunch at the beginning, 2 topics, and a walk in between if we're down for it. My only question, Nick, would be would this be outside altogether, or were you envisioning the topics to be an indoors thing, and how would that work?
It would be indoor at perhaps I think we were at the Crowder Center previously, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
It could be, hosted at any one of our indoor recreation centers, and, there could be an optional walk component if there are folks interested, like for the duration of a break, period. It could be 15, 20 minutes, maybe take a walk around the recreation center. But it was a potential format where you could have an optional lunch to start things from 12 to 1. And then at 1 o'clock, you get into it, have the main topic, main speaker, et cetera. And then, might take a 5-minute break and then jump from that into another topic, then take a walk afterward if people were up for it, and then kind of wrap up the day with one more topic.
I like the idea of the schedule. I'm not certain that the city is allowing us to do indoor stuff at this point. Is that the case?
We would not be able to with the commission itself is 10 people. Staff coming along would at least be 2 to 4 people. That alone, absent any public meeting attendance, would exceed the governor's mandate for indoor meetings. Assuming that is still in place on the time frame that we're talking about, that's the current standard today, is maximum of 10.
Vice Chair Alley.
I'll just speak for personal preference and maybe folks that aren't speaking up or community members. As of March, I will have not had a second of childcare in 12 months, and that's not going to stop anytime soon. So 4 hours is asking a lot in the middle of the day. So I might be able to make it work at the beginning of the week, but this is not possible. And my other thought is, as much as I want to go for a walk and see you all, I'm not going to get a closed room with any of you all for a very long time.
I'm
or
not
anybody
either.
else.
Not either. I mean, I don't feel safe being inside with a larger group. I do it with one and rarely. So if we're not going to be outside, I don't feel comfortable being inside together. Sorry, no offense. I just don't.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may suggest, I would recommend you just go ahead and adopt a conventional calendar with no special provision for a retreat for now. And then we would have the option to revisit this as we get into the spring and see what the environment looks like at that point, and look at doing a retreat potentially if things improve, vaccinations become more widespread. That might be a better activity during the summertime.
I'd be happy to support that course of action for now. I will make a motion to that effect.
Well, that puts us on the 15th is the third Monday, and that is President's Day. I don't know how many people would have that as a holiday or not.
President's Day.
It is not a city holiday, so it's not a conflict for us.
If we're good with that, that's okay. Then we can proceed. If not, we'd probably want to bump it back to the 8th if it is a conflict for folks, but it doesn't sound like it is.
And did I see a second?
A second.
Okay. Great. Seconded by Commissioner Sell. And will all in favor, please raise your hand. And if you're Robert, you say aye.
Actually, it appears that we have lost Robert.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I believe we still have a quorum, so let's get those hands back up. And I think that we're unanimous. Thank you very much.
And just for the minutes, because I know Raina will have to listen and watch the video. So that was with the meeting in February moved to the regular third Monday for now.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Let me pull up my agenda. And next up is the chair's report. I'll keep my report very short. I would like to say thank you to Mary Sell for all your work. This is Mary's last meeting, I believe. She has tendered her resignation to the BPAC, and she is moving on to be the director of Oaks and Spokes, their first full-time director, and she's going to be doing great things there and continue to grace us with her presence here, I'm sure. And so I learned a lot from you, and I've been inspired by you, and I look forward to working with you in the future. And good luck and thank you.
Thanks, Dwight.
I don't have anything else for the chair's report, so we can get right into the committee's reports, and we can start with the policy committee.
Thank you. We met virtually recently, continued on the same two topics as before, the sidewalk prioritization for the petition projects. We have not reached a conclusion, but I think we've reached an understanding of where we're trying to go. So staff's going to be working on kind of thinking through how their prioritization methodology might work and how we could be more proactive and strategic in getting the most impactful petition projects as possible. And then also thinking about how to kind of combine and work with safe routes to school initiatives. The other part we had was Jed Neffenegger, who came to talk about sign signals and markings. So this is specifically about mid-block crossings and intersections. Learned a lot from him about the work that they are doing. A couple key takeaways were they don't systematically go through the city looking for ways to improve intersections, particularly in kind of residential areas outside of the like corridor overhauls, but they are very open to citizen outreach. So if you have problematic intersections that you observe, reach out to them. They'll look at traffic counts and speed and environmental issues and see if there are ways to do improvements. Learned about some of the good work they're doing to kind of push NCDOT into a more kind of complete street kind of design. So making sure that their policy actually gets implemented and building that kind of productive relationship with them. And then the key takeaway, as always, is that they don't have enough funding. That they haven't really bounced back from the recession in terms of repaving, which is when a lot of markings improvements happen in terms of kind of putting in retroreflective crosswalks and stuff like that with thermoplastic. So I think it would be an important component of the commission and the commission members individually to keep pushing for increased funding. I know this doesn't sound glamorous, right? Getting more money for thermoplastic and stop signs, but those things save people's lives. So, these are the kind of things that a Vision Zero plan is going to tell us to do. So we can go ahead and do them now. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the Planning Commission.
Paul did some research for us into why the bike plan was not being implemented as new developments were coming in. So hopefully the short of that is hopefully our street design sections that we have revised recently will be put into place as soon as possible. We also talked a little bit about leaves piling up in new protected bike lanes and how that could be a maintenance problem. And there was also an issue brought up at the intersection of Harrington and Edenton Street about visibility with cars coming on Edenton and cyclists on the cycle track. So. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Pierre. And next up is Nick with the Outreach Committee.
There is actually no update from Outreach this month. We had a number of scheduling conflicts with our committee members, but I'm sure we'll be back at it full force come January. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will move right on to staff reports. Does the staff have reports today?
Just a couple. I'll go first, and then Eric and Barbara and Bee jump in as you see fit. The big news for us is all of our protected bike lane projects for this year are now in. So we've got the first couple of blocks of the downtown north-south Greenway connector. We've got Lineberry from Sierra west to Trailwood. We got all of Crabtree Boulevard, and we've got about 6 blocks with a couple of breaks in the middle for some parking on Morgan Street downtown. So that's my big news. Anybody else on the team?
Yeah, so let me report on the activities from the City Council. Chair Otwell gave a presentation at the December meeting to review the recommendations of the commission. The first item was implementing the on-street parking restrictions that the commission recommended for both Hardemont Drive and Milburnie Road. Both were approved unanimously. The second was item that's quietly approved, but very substantial in terms of updating our priorities in the bike plan. And so the council approved the project priority update that the commission had recommended. We are now in the process of translating that list, which is basically a 5-year target, into a batch of projects that we can get out the door and on the ground next summer. So we're trying to move as quickly as we can to implement that. The third item was, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and that list and the resurfacing for next year will be coming to BPAC next month.
And then the third item the City Council approved was the Commission's recommendations on the petition sidewalk program and the changes that you had made. We sat down with our engineering services staff subsequent to that meeting and looked at the batch of projects that we have in development. It looks like about half of the projects that we have identified are already in production. The other half will now be subject to the new ranking prioritization that the commission recommended and the City Council approved. So we'll have that for you in a future meeting. And while I have the floor, I want to also thank Ms. Sell for her service to the commission. Really appreciate all your hard work and the passion you bring to this. It's been fun. Just as a reminder that commissioners serve until replaced. Ms. Sell's vacancy was advertised with the most recent City Council meeting, so it's possible that she could be there could be a nominee in place as early as the first meeting in January. But if that's not the case, then Ms. Sell would continue to serve on the commission until that position is filled.
Yeah, we can only hope the council rejects her resignation. So we'll see. And thank you, Mr. Lamb, for covering for me on the council issues. I probably should have included that in my report. It seemed like so long ago. I didn't realize that was only this month. Oh,
it was just this month. Pass it along to B. Did you have anything? Okay. Barbara, how about you?
Yes. So I do have a brief announcement for the commission as it relates to micromobility. So at the end of October, staff received formal notice from Gotcha Mobility that they plan to exit the Raleigh market effective immediately and would cease all operations in the city. They cited challenges related to the current economic climate and increasing supply chain impacts of the global pandemic as the factors that led to this decision. In the meantime, staff has been working to prepare all necessary documents to begin advertising for new scooter operators. The city will begin advertising a request for proposals from new vendors in the upcoming weeks, and up to 3 new vendors will be selected and will execute a master encroachment agreement with the city upon selection in order to operate on City of Raleigh public right-of-way. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Don't believe anybody has any questions about the Gotcha scooters.
All right, well then that's all I had.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your work on it. If that ends the staff reports, next up we have the board comments and announcements. So we have general board comments, and here at 8:30 in the evening, does anybody wish to open a discussion with some general comments? Yes, Commissioner Barsness.
Thank you. I don't think this is a comment. It's actually a question. Should have probably asked it earlier, but Paul, I think you mentioned the walk audits and you're still doing those. So my question is are you going to email out the commissioners when you are proposing those? And the reason why is because I looked to try and do those, but my schedule wouldn't allow it. So I'm hoping I can do some in the new year.
So they're on hold for now. What we were trying to do was finish the rest of the downtown grid from where the state stopped. So they did from roughly Peace Street down to Martin.
Okay.
And we, over the course of the summer and then with the break until we figured out we could do it again during the pandemic, went from the remaining streets all the way down to South Street. And we actually coordinated the walk on Lenore with Parks and Rec, who are trying to do a Chavis Park to Dix Park connector. So right now we've got to sit back, write all of that up, and see if we can shoehorn it into the same appendix format that the state had from their consultant. So just right now it's a staff time issue to make sure we're doing something with the data we collected. Once we're done, if we like what that turned out to be, there's opportunities to look at other parts of town to look at. Again, we want to keep them relatively small. But I can think about places around NC State campus or maybe North Hills jump out as obvious candidates.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
This is Robert again. This question I have may be more for Eric. I had someone from the blind community ask about bus stops that don't have pavement in front or on them or at them. Is that in the purview of transportation to say that all bus stops at least are paved, or as many as can be have pavement on them?
Yes, that's the responsibility of our transit division, and they are going through each bus stop now. They did a complete system audit a couple of years ago, and they have been prioritizing the ones to knock out. That also includes a lot of what they've done for shelter construction. So,
right.
So yes, you are absolutely correct that every bus stop should have some paved landing area, have some degree of accessibility associated with it. We recognize that there are some older places out there that do not. And so we have worked with our transit folks to work on developing a plan to retrofit those locations.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that answer back.
Yeah, I will point out that there are two other transit operators in the city. One of them is the Wolf Line with NC State, and one is Go Triangle, which is our regional provider. They do have some routes. And there's a lot of stops that overlap that Go Raleigh is already addressing, but if there's some that aren't, it may be the purview of one of the other transit operators.
Okay, good.
Are there any more comments from the commission? I don't see any. We will move on to upcoming events. Does anybody have any upcoming events? Because my list is empty. Wow. Boring month. All right. Well, then the next thing we have is the confirmation of our next BPAC meeting on Monday, January 11th, 2021 at 6 p.m. And if everybody's good with that, we will move on to adjournment, and we will adjourn our final BPAC meeting of 2020, and we're going to hope for a much better 2021. Thank you, everybody.
See you next year. Somebody had to say it.
See you next year. Bye-bye.
Catch you later.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you all.